I think sometimes we know more than we think we do. Things that we do naturally or instinctively that we don't really think of as a technique or anything special, but really they are. Today I've got 4 super cute Christmas cards and a whole bunch of micro card making lessons. Some you've probably seen before and maybe some are brand new. Plus, there's a blog hop with giveaways. I'll give you those details too. Let's jump right in. Let's start with my favorite part of the release, these birds. I'll make a few and then I'll show you how I use some of the other new goodies to finish my cards. This holiday birds die set comes with 3 dies. Each one cuts a bird body, a wing, an eye, and a beak, and some winter accessories. Each one is all in one die so you don't lose the tiny pieces, which is really clever. I started by cutting a bunch of each bird from white cardstock, and this will give me the opportunity to customize the colors of each of the little pieces. If you use colored cardstock, like brown, then you'll end up with a brown scarf and a brown beak, so I figured cutting them from white was probably better. This one looks like a cardinal to me, and he's got a wing and a little belly piece too, as well as a scarf. I'm going to use some ink blending to add some color to the body and the wing. Then to make his mask, I'm going to use my black Copic marker and just color a little triangle on his face. I was lucky that the little eye, which I'll also color black, and the beak stayed in the cardstock when I pulled the die away, so I can color them in place, and then I used some liquid glue to attach them. I'll show you a different way to do this in a few minutes. Now what if you want 2 birds facing each other? A die cuts one way, and when it does, it creates a little curved edge on the top that looks fabulous and feels really nice, but from the back, it almost has a little sharp edge. And looking at the wing, it has some stitching cuts that are there to give it texture, and while they do cut through to the other side, again, it just doesn't look as nice. Whenever you want to reverse a die cut like this, you can just run them through your die cutting machine between 2 plates with no dies. That'll flatten those edges. It won't make them curve the other way, but it will be perfectly flat and ready for some color. So this is the same bird body, but I'm going to make this one into a robin just by changing the colors. I added the beak and eye and the wing. If you look closely, you'll see that the stitching detail is not quite as crisp as it was on the cardinal, but it is still visible. And now he's done. And I made him a girlfriend off camera. We'll see her in a few minutes. This next one has an adorable round shape, and he would work at any time of year, I think, in lots of bright colors. I'm going to stay with more of a wintry theme and color him brown again, and this time I'll add a blue belly. But here's a fun twist. This time I colored 2 wings, and by placing one behind him and turning the one on the front a little bit downward, I now have a bird that looks like he's flying. It's always fun to find little ways to customize your die cuts like this. If you're like me, you usually end up losing those little eye and beak bits, so here's another idea. Color the beak with a yellow marker and then mask it off before blending ink over the rest of the body. And of course you could color the whole bird with markers and get lots of textures and details if you want. I'm going to do another flying bird, and this time his main color will be blue. Really, the color variations on these birds are endless, and you could create realistic or rainbow or whatever you want. I added a little dimension to him with some brown ink and some darker blue ink as well. And this time I added one of the winter accessories, this little Santa hat. I added an eye made with my black marker, and then I got the wings glued on. For the hat, this clever design allows you to color the whole hat red or whatever color you want, and then add the white trim separately. And now here's my whole little flock. They're so cute, aren't they? Today's video is part of a hop to celebrate the latest Pretty Pink Posh release. Head to my blog with the link below to get all the details. Now let's make some cards. For the first one, I'm using the new winter word stencil, but I want to have some white space for my bird and sentiment, so I'm placing it off the edge of my cardstock. I'm going to mask off the top there to protect my white space, but I'm also going to do some masking as I blend my colors through, so that each line is a different color. I'm using a piece of acetate as my reusable mask, and I'm putting 2 colors through each line, a lighter color all over, and then a deeper color just at the bases of the letters. I'm cleaning the acetate each time, and I'm moving the tape. The reason I use one acetate and one tape is that the tape is sticky and it stays in place on its own. I find it hard to hold on to 2 pieces of acetate in place as I'm blending in between them. I worked my way down and I mixed up the colors a bit so that I didn't have the same colors on the same text, since I have 3 colors and there are 3 different sentiments on the stencil. Once that was all done, I decided that even though I liked the look, it felt a little bit busy when I put my bird on it. And counterintuitively, I decided that the answer to that was to add more color. This will give me a more tone-on-tone and more filled-in look on that bottom half of my card. I filled in each line with the brush that I had used with the lighter ink, not really adding more ink, just cleaning off the brushes. But like every rule, I made an exception and I left the strip behind the green white. It's fun to do little unexpected details like this to add some visual interest. To trim down the panel, I used another new product, the Eyelet rectangles. This is a set of nesting dies that gives you different sizes that will work for card fronts or tags or smaller focal areas. To make the holes in the scallops more visible, I added a layer of cardstock I had colored with the same pink ink and cut just a slightly larger than the panel. This adds a little definition to the edges of my card. I glued the bird down flat. I'm going to keep these cards as flat as I can to make them good for mailing. That means I didn't use any foam tape, but of course you could if you want some more dimension. And a wobbler would be really fun too, to make the bird look like he's really flying. To finish this one, I added one of the Christmas sentiment strip sentiments. And you can see that there's also some gold splatter. When I don't want to add any dimension or gems, gold splatter is an easy way to add some sparkle and shine to Christmas cards. For the next card, I'm going to do some masking. I've cut one of the smaller eyelet rectangles from a piece of masking paper, and you can see that it's going to be very difficult to try and center that properly on my panel. So here's a solution. I started by putting the positive shape down where I wanted it, right in the center. Even that isn't always easy, and I took a little time to make sure it was as straight and centered as possible. Then I was able to put the outside of the mask down around it. Again, it's not always easy because it's so flexible and sticky, but once I had it in place, I was able to peel back the inner piece, and now I know that my ink blending will be pretty centered. Now I'm blending pink ink just around the outside edges of the scallops and letting it fade out to white in the center. That'll give the look of a bit of a glow. And now to add a little more interest to this background panel, I grabbed the new Pierced Snowflake cover plate. This will add some stitching lines on the panel. This cover plate does also cut a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch rectangle, but because I had already trimmed down my panel with the eyelet rectangle, it'll just add the stitching all over. For my sentiment, I'm using the new Merry word die. I love this scripty font. I've got two here, and this first one I'm just going to add some red ink to. Having a sticky mat underneath makes it really easy to hold on to all those skinny little bits without bending or tearing it. I glued one of my birds and the Merry die onto the card, and to finish the sentiment, I stamped the word Christmas underneath. I have a stamp surgery lesson about that, but I filmed this out of order, so we'll come back to that. For my next card, I used the layered winter wreath stencil set. This one has 3 layers, one for branches, then one for the leaves, and finally one for berries. This wreath leaves an opening in the center of the cardstock, and it has a very open look itself, and I wondered if I could just get a more full look. One way to do it would be to clean the stencil and flip it over so that the branches were kind of moving in the opposite direction, but I didn't feel like cleaning my stencil, so I just turned it by 90 degrees. Then I used some of the holly leaves to help me position the next layer of the branches. It got a little confusing because of the 2 layers of brown underneath, but I knew that by starting with the name that's etched in each of the stencils in the bottom corner and then turning the same way, I should be able to figure it out. The berry layer was a little easier because of how the berries line up with the ends of the little branches, and I did both layers of that one as well. And now I thought it was actually a little too busy, but I'll come back to that. Now I've told you about the eyelet rectangles, but you know that I love to make cards that are 4 1/4 inch squares. So let me show you how to cut down a scalloped rectangle. I counted the number of scallops across the top, and that was 13. And then I positioned the die so that the end covered over that row of scallops. I'll turn it over so that you can see how they all line up. It almost kind of clicks into place. Then I ran it through my die cutting machine, and now I've got an eyelet square. If you look closely, you'll see some extra stitching along the corners, and in fact, where the stitching ran down one of the edges, it actually perforated it so well, it started to try and come apart. I'll show you how I fixed, or I really hid that. Here's the second sentiment Merry, and this time I'm putting not one, but several layers of brown ink onto it to give me a darker color. This will work with whatever dye inks you have. And here's the stamp surgery lesson. I knew I wanted the word Christmas, and of course you can mask the rest of the sentiment if you don't like the idea of cutting apart your stamps, but there are several here with the word Christmas, so I just chose one that I probably would be less likely to use all as one sentiment, so that I won't have to worry about trying to piece it back together too often. But if I do want to piece it back together, I can, because as I cut it, I pulled the words apart a little with my hand, and then I used very sharp scissors to cut the words apart on an angle, which will make it easier for me to line them back up. As I stamp the Christmas word, you can see that I've added a pop of color with some blue ink and gold splatter to the eyelet square I made. And by gluing it all down flat, you can't tell that perforation is even there. The extra stitching is also nearly invisible. And by cutting down my busy stenciled panel with a circle die, I've made this card a little more clean and simple. You can see my robin and his girlfriend here, along with the cardinal. Now I'm out of birds, so for my final card, I thought I'd try something else. These 9 trees are cut with coordinating dies from the holiday tree set, and that's just a reminder that you don't always have to use the stamps and dies together, especially when it's very clear what the shape of the die is. I blended my inks over top. Some of the trees are not sticking very well to my sticky mat because it's still a little wet from cleaning, and I didn't press them down hard enough. I'm adding ink on both edges of the trees, letting it fade to the center so that each tree will look like it has a little dimension. I added splatter to the trees, and I created my card with another cut-down eyelet square panel, but now I'm thinking they look a little plain. In the stamp set, there's a stripe stamp that I thought I'd quite like to use to add a little interest just to the green trees, but I'm too nervous to stamp right onto the card at this point, so I came up with another solution. I cut and blended 3 more trees, and I used the negative offcut to help me with placement. Then I used a darker green ink to stamp the stripes onto each one of them. I had a little trouble getting the tree back out because of course it stuck to that sticky mat, and I got out my piercing tool, but do not use something sharp on a sticky mat like this. Luckily, I thought of that in time. I ended up peeling back the outline cardstock just enough to let me grab the tip of the tree. Then I just glued the 3 new trees on top of the previous trees. This is a great way to add just a little bit of dimension as well as the interest from the stripes. I chose a sentiment that fit in between the trees to finish this one off. It's funny how we use so many little techniques without even thinking about them. Are there any new ones here that you wanted to try out? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to use the link in the description to head to my blog for more details about how you can win some prizes from Pretty Pink Posh. Remember, it's only available on the blog hop. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.